The Valorian Compact had ruled the stars for 11,000 years, and they had never known defeat. They were an ancient race of tall beings with silver skin and eyes that glowed like dying stars, and they believed themselves to be the rightful masters of all they surveyed. Their empire stretched across 3,000 star systems, and they had conquered or contained every species they had ever encountered. They did not see themselves as cruel, but rather as necessary, and they believed that younger species needed guidance and control. When their long-range sensors first detected the radio signals bleeding out from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, they were not concerned. They had seen this before many times, and they knew exactly what to do. Ambassador HFY was chosen for the mission because he had successfully contained 47 primitive species in his career, and he approached this task with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything. His fleet of 40 warships entered the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, Earth time, and the people of that blue planet looked up at their screens in terror and wonder. The ships were massive, and they blocked out the sun as they took position above the major cities of Earth. HFY broadcast his message to every frequency the humans used, and his words were translated into every language they spoke. People of Earth, he said in a voice that carried no emotion, I am Ambassador HFY of the Valorian Compact, and I come to deliver the terms of your containment. The world leaders gathered in emergency sessions, and billions of humans watched their screens with held breath as the alien continued speaking. The galaxy is not empty, and it is not free. HFY explained. It belongs to the Compact, and it has belonged to us for longer than your species has existed, and we have rules that must be followed. He pulled up a holographic map that showed the Sol system surrounded by a glowing red line. This is your boundary, he declared. You are granted the Sol system and nothing more, and you will recall your colony ships that travel toward Proxima Centauri, and you will abandon your research station on Tau Ceti 4. The United Nations Security Council demanded a meeting, and HFY agreed because he enjoyed watching primitive species try to negotiate their way out of containment. Admiral Chen Weilin was the youngest member of the council, and she sat in silence as the other leaders begged and bargained and threatened. The President of the United States spoke of human rights and the dignity of all sentient beings. The Prime Minister of India spoke of peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. The Premier of China spoke of trade agreements and cultural exchange. HFY listened to all of it with the patience of someone who had heard the same arguments 1,000 times before. You do not understand, he finally said. This is not a negotiation, and these are not suggestions, and this is how things are. He leaned forward, and his glowing eyes fixed on each human leader in turn. You are young, and you are weak, and you have achieved nothing of significance. He continued. The galaxy has rules that have existed since before your ancestors crawled out of the ocean, and you will learn these rules, or you will be taught them. Admiral Chung finally spoke, and her voice was calm and steady. What happens if we cross the line? She asked. HFY smiled the way a parent smiles at a foolish child. Any human vessel that crosses the boundary will be destroyed without warning, he answered. Any human colony outside the boundary will be eliminated, and any human who sets foot on worlds that do not belong to you will die. The room was silent for a long moment. We understand, Chun said. You have drawn your line. HFY nodded, and he felt satisfied that this species had been properly contained. The Compact will return in 1 year to verify your compliance, he announced. Do not disappoint us. His fleet departed, and the Valorians logged the encounter as routine, and they filed it away as Case 447,312 in their vast archives of successful first contacts. They did not look back, and they did not think about the small blue planet again. This was their mistake. In the hours after the alien ships left Earth orbit, something changed in humanity. The arguments stopped and the political divisions healed overnight, and enemies who had spent decades threatening each other suddenly found common ground. The President of the United States called the Premier of China, and they spoke not as rivals, but as members of the same family facing a common threat. They drew a line around us. The President said, "Then we will erase it." The Premier replied, "Within 1 week, every nation on Earth had signed the Unity Mandate, and it was the most significant document in human history. All military forces were combined into a single command structure, and all scientific resources were pooled into shared research facilities, and all industrial capacity was redirected toward a single goal." Admiral Chen was given command of the newly formed Human Defense Force, and she addressed the world in a broadcast that reached every screen on the planet. "They call us young, and they call us weak," she said. "They told us we have achieved nothing of significance, and they gave us a box and told us to stay inside it." She paused, and her eyes burned with cold fire. "They were wrong about us, and they do not understand what we are, and they do not know what we can become when we are united." Across the world, the factories began to run day and night, and the shipyards that had built cargo vessels now built warships, and the scientists who had competed against each other now worked side by side. The Valorians had given humanity 1 year to comply with their demands. Humanity had other plans in secret facilities hidden beneath mountains and oceans. The greatest minds in human history worked on weapons that should have taken centuries to develop. They shared every discovery instantly, and they built on each other's work without ego or competition, and they pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The containment line glowed red on every map in every command center on Earth, and in her office, Admiral Chen looked at that line every day, and she smiled, because she knew something the Valorians did not know. She knew that humanity had never responded well to being told where they could not go. She knew that drawing a line in front of humans was not a way to stop them, but rather a way to make them determined to cross it. And she knew that in 18 months that line would cease to exist. The Valorians had drawn the first line. They had no idea what was coming. Commander Yethrol had served at Meridian Point Border Station for 30 years, and in all that time, he had never seen anything interesting happen. The station was positioned at the edge of compact space, where the containment line around the Sol system was monitored, and his job was simple and boring. He watched the humans, and he made sure they stayed inside their box, and he followed reports that nobody ever read. On the morning that everything changed, he was drinking his 3rd cup of stimulant tea and reviewing sensor data that showed nothing unusual. Then the alarms began to scream, "Commander!" His sensor officer shouted with panic in her voice, "We have contacts emerging from subspace." Yethrol spilled his tea as he jumped from his chair and rushed to the tactical display. What he saw made no sense at all. "That cannot be correct," he whispered. "Run the scan again." The sensor officer ran it 3 more times, and the result was the same each time. 32,000 ships were approaching the station in perfect formation, and they were not compact vessels, and they were not from any species in the galactic database. They were human impossible. Yethrol breathed. They had 18 months, and they were confined to one system, and how could they build so many ships? But the ships were there, and they were real, and they were coming closer with every second. He activated the communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. "Human vessels, you are in violation of compact territory," he announced in his most commanding voice. "You have crossed the containment boundary, and you must turn back immediately, or you will be destroyed." For a long moment there was only silence, and Yethrol felt a small hope that perhaps the humans would see reason. And a voice came through the speakers, and it was calm and steady, and it belonged to Admiral Chen Weilin. "Commander Yethrol," she said, "we received your message 18 months ago, and we have thought about it very carefully. Then you understand that you must turn back." Yethrol replied, The compact will not tolerate this violation. We understand that you see the galaxy as a map. Chun continued as if he had not spoken. You draw lines and borders and territories, and you have been doing this for 11,000 years. This is the natural order. Yethrol insisted. This is how civilization works. Perhaps, Chun acknowledged. But we have spent the last 18 months building something new, and we call them erasers. Yethrol felt a cold fear creep into his heart. You cannot threaten the compact, he warned. We have ruled the stars since before your species existed, and we have crushed every challenge to our authority. I am not making threats, Chun said. I am simply explaining what is about to happen, and you should probably evacuate your station now. Yethrol ended the communication and turned to his tactical officer. All weapons online, he ordered. Target the lead vessels and prepare to fire. His station had 48 heavy plasma cannons and 12 missile batteries, and it could destroy a small fleet by itself. Against 32,000 ships, it was nothing. The human vessels opened fire, and Yethrol had never seen weapons like theirs before. Their beams cut through compact shields like they were not even there, and their missiles moved in patterns that the targeting computers could not predict. And their electronic warfare systems turned his sensors into useless noise. The battle lasted 9 minutes. When it was over, the mighty border station was a broken wreck drifting in space, and Yethrol knelt in the ruins of his command center with human soldiers standing all around him. Admiral Chun walked through the debris and stopped in front of him, and she looked down at him without hatred, but also without mercy. This is not possible. Yethrol whispered, You had only 18 months, and we have had 11,000 years, and how did you do this? Chun considered his question for a moment before answering. You spent 11,000 years maintaining your map, she explained. You drew your lines, and you enforced your borders, and you made sure nothing ever changed. She crouched down so she could look into his eyes. We spent 18 months asking a different question, she continued. We asked ourselves why maps like yours should exist at all, and we discovered that we did not like the answer. Yethrol stared at her with confusion and fear. What are you going to do now? He asked. Chun stood up and walked to the shattered viewport that looked out at the stars. We are going to erase your map, she said. Every line and every border and every boundary that you have drawn around other species for 11,000 years. The compact will not allow this. Yethrol protested. They will send fleets that will darken the stars, and they will destroy your entire species. Chun smiled, and it was not a kind smile. We are counting on it, she replied. She turned to her communications officer and nodded. Send the message, she ordered. Across every compact frequency, a single transmission began to broadcast to the Valorian compact and all member species. Chun's recorded voice announced, This is Admiral Chun Wei-Lin of the Human Defense Force, and I am speaking to you from what used to be your border station at Meridian Point. She paused to let that sink in. 18 months ago, your ambassador told us that we were young and weak, and that we had achieved nothing of significance, and he drew a line around our home and told us to stay inside it. Her voice grew harder and colder. That line has been erased, and we are coming to discuss the rest of your map with you, and I suggest you prepare for that discussion. The message ended, and across 3,000 star systems, the leaders of the compact stared at their screens in disbelief. They had contained hundreds of species over thousands of years, and not one had ever broken free. Not one had ever fought back like this. Not one had ever threatened to erase the map itself in the Grand Council chamber. The ancient lords of the compact gathered, and they argued, and they planned, and they mobilized the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. They would teach these humans their place. They would crush this rebellion and make an example that would echo through eternity. They did not understand yet that the rules had changed. They did not know that they were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted, and somewhere in the black between the stars, Admiral Chen Wei-lin looked at her fleet and felt pride in what humanity had become. They had been given a box and told to stay inside it. Instead, they had broken out, and now they would break everything the compact had ever built. The erasure had begun. Aliens drew the first line. Humanity erased the entire map. The Grand Deliberation Chamber had not been used in 300 years because nothing important enough had happened to require it. Now every seat was filled and the air hummed with tension and fear. 17 species made up the compact, and they had gathered to discuss the human problem. The Valorians sat in the center with their silver skin and glowing eyes, and they looked diminished somehow, as if the attack on Meridian Point had aged them. The crystalline choir occupied the eastern section, and they were beings made of living crystal who spoke in harmonics that echoed through the chamber. The Skethver floated in their containment fields, and they were the oldest race in the compact, with 9,000 years of memory stored in their ancient minds. The Koloth hunched in their massive armored bodies, and they were warriors who had been conquered long ago and forced to serve as the military arm of the compact. There were others too, and each species had its place in the hierarchy, and each had learned to accept the lines that had been drawn around them. The High Speaker of the Valorians rose and called the assembly to order. "We have all seen the recordings from Meridian Point," he began. "We have all heard the human message, and we are here to decide how to respond." The crystalline choir spoke first, and their harmonics filled the chamber with sound. "The humans are an anomaly," they sang. "Our calculations showed they would need 2,000 years to reach this technological level, and they achieved it in 18 months, and this should not be possible." The intelligence director stepped forward, and he was a small Valorian with nervous eyes who had spent his life studying other species. "We have analyzed everything we know about the humans," he reported, "and we have discovered how they achieve the impossible." The chamber fell silent, and everyone leaned forward to hear. "They pooled everything," the director explained. "Every nation and every resource and every mind, and they call it the Unity Mandate, and there is no internal competition among them anymore, and there is no wasted effort." He brought up images on the central display showing human factories and shipyards and research facilities. Every scientist on their planet worked on the same problems at the same time. He continued, "Every factory produced the same weapons, and every shipyard built the same vessels, and they shared all knowledge instantly without secrets or rivalry." The Koloth general laughed, and it was a harsh sound like grinding metal. "Unified species are nothing new," he growled. "We have crushed many of them before. The Koloth unified through conquest." The director replied, "The Meridian swarm unified through biology in their hive mind, and these humans are different." He paused and his voice dropped lower. "These humans unified through choice," he said, "through rage and through purpose, and we insulted them, and they chose to become a single weapon aimed at us." The chamber erupted in arguments and accusations, and the various species blamed each other for the current crisis. The ancient Skethver remained silent through all of it, and finally he raised one withered appendage, and the room fell quiet. "I have lived for 9,000 years," he said in a voice like dry leaves, "and I have seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach, and I have watched the compact grow from 3 systems to 3,000. He turned his ancient eyes toward the Valorian leadership. "In all that time, we have never faced a threat like this," he continued. "Not because the humans are strong, but because they do not think like us, and they do not want what other species want." "What do they want?" the High Speaker asked. "They want to destroy the map," the Skethver answered. "Not to draw a new one with themselves at the center, but to erase all the lines completely, and they are willing to die for this." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Valorian War Minister stood, and his voice was hard and cold. "Then we will give them death," he declared. "We will mobilize the greatest fleet in galactic history, and we will crush them utterly. And we will make an example that will be remembered for 10,000 years. The vote was unanimous, and the order went out across the compact. 12,000 ships from 9 species began moving toward human space, and it was the largest military force assembled in 4,000 years. The fleet had enough firepower to crack planets and boil oceans and turn entire systems into ash. Admiral Kethful, the same ambassador who had delivered the original containment order, was given command: find their homeworld. His orders read: destroy it and leave nothing alive. The fleet traveled through subspace for 3 weeks, and they emerged at the edge of the Sol system ready for the greatest battle in galactic history. What they found was nothing Earth was. There with its blue oceans and white clouds, but the orbital stations were gone, and the lunar bases were gone, and the entire human fleet had vanished. Where are they? Kethful demanded. Find them immediately. His sensor officers searched desperately, but there was no sign of the 32,000 ships that had destroyed Meridian Point. Then the reports began flooding in from across. Compact space human ships had appeared at 17 different systems simultaneously, and they were not attacking military targets. They were attacking infrastructure. Fuel depots exploded in the Valorian home system, and communication relays went dark across the crystalline territories. And shipyards burned in the Koloth manufacturing zones. Admiral Chun's voice echoed across every compact frequency. You built your empire on logistics, she said, on supply lines and communication networks, and the assumption that no enemy would be mad enough to attack everything at once. Kethful listened with growing horror as more reports came in. We are not an empire, Chun continued. We are not trying to hold territory or claim systems for ourselves, and we have no supply lines for you to cut because we do not need to hold anything. Another fuel depot exploded, and another communication relay went silent. We are just erasing lines, Chun finished. Every line you have ever drawn, and we will not stop until the map is blank. Kethful looked at the tactical display and watched his empire begin to burn. The greatest fleet in galactic history was positioned at the wrong location, attacking an empty system while the humans dismantled everything the compact had built over 11,000 years. He had been outsmarted by a species that had achieved spaceflight less than a century ago. He had been beaten by creatures the compact had dismissed as primitives, and somewhere in the dark between the stars, Admiral Chun. Wei Lin smiled as she watched the map begin to burn. The war lasted 3 years, though many historians would later argue that war was the wrong word for what happened. Wars are fought between powers that want something from each other, and the humans did not want anything the compact had. They did not want territory, and they did not want resources, and they did not want slaves or tribute or submission. They wanted to break things, and then they wanted to leave. The compact fought to defend, and to preserve, and to maintain the order they had. Built over 11,000 years, humanity fought to dismantle. They attacked shipyards and left the planets untouched, and they destroyed fuel depots but never harmed civilians, and they cut communication lines but always gave warning before they did so. When they captured compact officers, they treated them well, and then they released them with a simple message. The lines are being erased, and you can fight us and die, or you can accept it and live. Many chose to fight and many died, but slowly the compact began to crumble, not because humanity defeated their fleets in battle, though they won most of those battles too, but because humanity destroyed the infrastructure that made the compact possible. An empire of 3,000 systems cannot function without communication, and it cannot maintain control without supply lines, and it cannot project power without shipyards to build warships. The humans understood this, and they exploited it with ruthless efficiency. Captain Yuri Volkov became famous during the second year of the war, and he was a tall man from Russia with ice-blue eyes and a quiet voice. He led the assault on the Skethver homeworld, and his fleet dropped out of subspace above the ancient planet on a morning that would be remembered for centuries. The Skethfor were the oldest species in the compact, and their world was covered with monuments to their 9,000 years of civilization. Volkov did not attack those monuments, and he did not bombard the cities. And he did not threaten the civilian population. Instead, he transmitted a single message. "I wish to speak with your elder." He said, "We have things to discuss." The Skethfor elder was 9,000 years old, and he had witnessed the rise of the compact, and he had seen dozens of species try to resist and fail. He agreed to the meeting because he was curious about these strange humans who fought without wanting to conquer. They met on a platform floating above the elder's ancestral home, and Volkov came alone and unarmed. "You are either very brave or very foolish," the elder observed. "Probably both." Volkov admitted the elder studied him with ancient eyes that had seen more than any human could imagine. "Your species has surprised us," he said. "We did not think you capable of this, and we did not believe any species could challenge the compact so quickly. We surprised ourselves." Volkov replied, "We did not know we could do this either until we were forced to try." The elder nodded slowly. "So now you have come to my world with your fleet and your weapons," he said. "What do you want from us?" Volkov was silent for a long moment, and he seemed to be thinking carefully about his answer. "You know what is strange?" he finally said. "We do not want anything you have, and we do not want your planets or your technology or your ancient knowledge. Then why are you here?" "We want you to understand something," Volkov explained. "We want you to understand that you do not get to draw lines around other people anymore, and not us, and not anyone else, and not ever again." The elder had lived for 9,000 years, and he had seen empires rise and fall like waves, and he had watched species burn themselves out in their hunger for power. He had never met anyone like this human who stood before him without greed or ambition. "What happens when this is over?" the elder asked. "What will you do with all this power you have gathered?" Volkov shrugged, and a small smile crossed his face. "Go home, probably," he answered. "Explore the galaxy and meet new species, and maybe we will finally have time to argue with each other." Again, the elder tilted his head in confusion. "You want to argue with each other? We were never meant to be this unified," Volkov explained. "Humans are messy and complicated, and we disagree about everything, and we fight among ourselves constantly." He looked up at the stars with something like longing in his eyes. "The unity mandate brought us together because we had to survive," he continued. "But we are looking forward to the day when we can go back to being ourselves and having stupid arguments about sports and politics and which food is better." The elder felt something he had not experienced in millennia, and it took him a moment to recognize it as hope. "You could rule everything," he said. "You have proven yourselves stronger than the compact, and you could draw your own map and make yourselves the masters of the galaxy." "Yes, we could," Volkov agreed. "But then we would be you, and we have spent 3 years proving that we do not want to be you." The elder was silent for a long time, and around them the stars turned slowly in their eternal dance. "I have lived for 9,000 years," he finally said, "and I have watched the compact draw lines around hundreds of species, and I have told myself that it was necessary, and that it was right." He looked at Volkov with ancient eyes that held something new. "Perhaps I was wrong," he admitted. "Perhaps you were," Volkov agreed without judgment. "But you can choose to be different now, and that is what matters." The Skethfor surrendered that day, and they became the first compact species to formally withdraw from the alliance. Others followed, and within 6 months, the compact had lost half its members. Not because humanity conquered them, but because humanity showed them another way. The lines were burning, and the map was being erased, and across the galaxy species that had been contained for thousands of years began to imagine what freedom might look like. And at the center of it, all the humans kept fighting and kept dismantling and kept refusing to take anything for themselves. They were the strangest conquerors. the galaxy had ever seen because they did not want to conquer at all. The Treaty of Seoul was signed on a space station built in neutral territory, and humanity insisted on neutral territory because they refused to hold the ceremony anywhere that might suggest ownership. Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood at one end of this long table, and Ambassador Kethfall stood at the other, and between them lay a document that would change the galaxy forever. Kethfall looked older than he had 3 years ago, and his silver skin had dulled, and his glowing eyes had dimmed, and the weight of everything he had lost was visible in every line of his face. "The compact is dissolved," he said, and the words seemed to cause him physical pain. "The borders are erased as you demanded, and every species now governs only themselves." He pushed the document across the table. "The map is blank," he finished. "Are you satisfied now?" Chun picked up the document and studied it for a moment before signing her name. "Satisfied is not the right word," she said. "We did not do this for satisfaction." "Then why?" Kethfall demanded, and his voice cracked with frustration and grief. "Your species was contained to one system, and now you could claim 1,000 systems or 10,000, and you could rebuild every border with yourselves at the center." He slammed his hand on the table. "Why will you not take what you have won?" He shouted. Chun set down her pen and looked at him with eyes that held no triumph and no pride. "Because we remember what it felt like," she said quietly, "to be told where we could go and where we could not, and to have someone else decide our boundaries and our future." She walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. "We did not tear down your map so we could draw a new one," she continued. "We tore it down because maps like that should not exist." Kethfall stared at her, and he could not understand what he was hearing. "Every species in history has wanted power," he protested. "Every civilization has sought to expand and to dominate, and this is the nature of intelligent life." "Maybe," Chun acknowledged. "Or maybe there's just what you have always believed because you have never seen anything different." She turned back to face him. "The galaxy is not territory to be divided," she said. "It is a place to be explored and a conversation to be had, and conversations work better when no one is holding a weapon." She extended her hand toward him, and it was a human gesture of peace that Kethfall had learned during the long negotiations. "We do not want to be your masters," she told him. "We want to be your neighbors." Kethfall stared at her hand for a long time, and in that moment he thought about everything he had believed and everything he had done in service to the compact. He had contained 47 species in his career, and he had drawn lines around their worlds and told them to stay inside, and he had believed he was doing the right thing. Now a human stood before him, offering friendship instead of domination and peace instead of conquest. He took her hand. The signing ceremony concluded, and representatives from 100 worlds watched as the last remnants of the compact were officially dissolved. There were no cheers and no celebrations because too many had died and too much had been lost for anyone to feel like celebrating. But there was hope, and there was possibility, and there was a future that no one had ever imagined. Admiral Chun gave one final address before the human fleet departed for home. For 11,000 years, this galaxy was ruled by lines, she said. Lines that told species where they could go and what they could do and who they could become. She paused and looked out at the assembled representatives of dozens of worlds. "Those lines are gone now," she continued. "The map is blank. And what happens next is up to all of us together." She smiled, and for the first time since the war began, it was a genuine smile. "We are going home now," she announced. "We have been united for 3 years, and we are tired, and we miss arguing with each other about stupid things." There was surprised laughter from the assembly. "But we will be back to visit," Chun promised. "As neighbors and as friends and as fellow travelers in this strange and beautiful galaxy." The human fleet departed, and they did not leave garrisons behind, and they did not establish bases, and they did not claim any territory for themselves. They simply went home. 50 years later, the galaxy was transformed beyond recognition. Trade routes connected species that had never been allowed to meet, and ideas flowed between worlds without checkpoints or restrictions, and cultures mixed and mingled in ways that would have been impossible under the compact. Conflicts still erupted because they always would, and intelligent beings would always find things to disagree about. But they were disputes between equals and negotiations between partners, and not edicts handed down from masters to servants, and humanity was everywhere and nowhere. Some had settled on distant worlds where they built new lives among alien neighbors, and some had pushed beyond the old compact borders into regions that no one had ever mapped. Some had gone home to Earth, and they were content to raise families and tend gardens and argue about politics and sports and which food was better. The Unity Mandate had been dissolved on the same day the Compact fell, and humans went back to being messy and complicated and disagreeable. They would not have had it any other way in the archives of 100 worlds. Historians studied the human phenomenon, and they wrote papers and gave lectures and debated endlessly about what had happened. How had a species confined to a single system dismantled an 11,000-year empire in just 3 years? How had they gathered so much power and then simply walked away? The answer was always the same, and it was never satisfying. To those who wanted a simple explanation, the humans had been told they could not cross a line, and so they had erased every line in the galaxy. They had been given the chance to become emperors, and they had chosen instead to become neighbors. They had burned the map, and then they had left the page blank for everyone to fill together. It was the strangest victory in galactic history, and the historians would argue about it for centuries. But in the small house on Earth, an old woman named Wei Lin Chun sat on her porch and watched the sunset, and she did not think about history or legacy or the great deeds she had done. She thought about her grandchildren who were playing in the yard, and she thought about the garden she needed to tend tomorrow. And she thought about how nice it was to finally be home. The Valorians had drawn the first line, humanity had erased the entire map. And then they had done the most human thing of all. They had gone back to being themselves.